My new job started on a chilly autumn evening. The building, a massive corporate skyscraper, loomed over the city, casting long shadows that stretched out as the sun dipped below the horizon. I had been hired as the night janitor, a position I took out of sheer necessity. The instructions were clear: never leave the premises after sunset. The first night, I entered the building with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The lobby was grand, with marble floors that reflected the dim light from ornate chandeliers. My footsteps echoed as I made my way to the security desk to sign in. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. As I began my rounds, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hallways seemed to stretch endlessly, and the darkness seemed to creep in faster than usual. Each room I cleaned was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the building settling. Shadows danced along the walls, fueled by my overactive imagination. I paused in front of a large office window, staring out at the city below. The lights twinkled, a stark contrast to the dim interior of the building. I glanced at my watch. It was almost sunset. The strange rule about not leaving after dark echoed in my mind, but I brushed it off as a mere precaution. Still, a sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach. As the sun finally set, the building seemed to come alive with an unsettling energy. The air grew colder, and a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows. I heard a faint whisper, barely audible, like a breath on the back of my neck. My heart raced, and I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just an empty corridor stretching into darkness. With the unsettling first night behind me, I returned the next evening, determined to push through my anxiety. As I walked through the now familiar hallways, I decided to explore the building more thoroughly. The vast expanse of offices, meeting rooms, and storage areas seemed endless, each corner revealing more shadows and secrets. It was during one of these explorations that I stumbled upon a door that was different from the others. Unlike the modern sleek doors in the rest of the building, this one was old, wooden, and heavily locked. The brass handle was tarnished, and the door itself seemed out of place in the contemporary design of the skyscraper. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Frustration and curiosity gnawed at me. Later, as I was emptying the trash bins in one of the offices, I struck up a conversation with a fellow night worker, a security guard named Tom. He was an older man, with tired eyes that seemed to hold many stories. When I mentioned the door, his expression changed, a shadow crossing his face. He warned me in a hushed tone to leave it alone and never stay after sunset. His cryptic words only heightened my curiosity. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. I started noticing small, almost imperceptible changes around me. Papers that I had neatly stacked were now scattered, lights flickered without reason, and a cold draft seemed to follow me everywhere I went. It felt as if the building itself was watching me, waiting for something. By the time the sun began to set, the familiar sense of dread had returned. I found myself drawn back to the mysterious door. Standing there, I felt an overwhelming urge to uncover its secrets, despite Tom's warning. The silence around me grew thicker, and the shadows seemed to deepen, pressing in from all sides. I took a deep breath, resolved to find out what lay behind that door, even if it meant facing the unknown. Determined to solve the mystery of the door, I spent the next few nights gathering my courage. Each night, The building felt more oppressive, the shadows darker, and the sounds more unsettling. On the fourth night, I decided it was time to take action. As I walked down the hallway towards the door, I felt a presence behind me. Turning quickly, I caught a glimpse of a figure at the end of the corridor. It was just a shadow, but it sent a chill down my spine. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence was broken only by the echo of my footsteps. I reached the door and tried the handle again, but it was still firmly locked. Frustration and fear mixed within me, making my hands tremble. Suddenly, I heard a faint, eerie whisper coming from behind the door. My breath caught in my throat as I leaned closer, trying to make out the words. It was a language I couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakably ominous. Later that night, while cleaning one of the offices, I found an old, dusty book on a shelf. Its pages were filled with strange symbols and drawings. The book seemed ancient, and as I flipped through it, I felt a strange connection to the mysterious door. It was as if the book was calling out to me, urging me to continue my investigation. My encounters with the shadowy figures became more frequent. They never approached me directly, but lingered at the edge of my vision, always watching. One night, while taking out the trash, I saw one of these figures standing at the far end of the parking lot. It was tall and dark, with no discernible features. Fear gripped me, but I couldn't look away. The figure seemed to melt into the darkness as I stared, leaving me shaken and more determined than ever to uncover the building's secrets. As the week went on, my sleep was plagued by nightmares. In my dreams, the building transformed into a labyrinth of dark hallways and endless doors. The whispering voices grew louder, and the shadowy figures closed in. Each morning, I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The fear and curiosity were consuming me, driving me closer to the edge. Determined to uncover the truth, I returned to work with a renewed sense of purpose. The whispers and shadows seemed to intensify with each passing night, but I was resolute. As I walked through the darkened corridors, I felt the unseen presence growing stronger, almost palpable. The air felt heavier, charged with an unexplainable energy. One night, as I was cleaning a deserted conference room, the lights flickered and went out completely. Plunged into darkness, I fumbled for my flashlight. The beam of light pierced the blackness, revealing a room that seemed to shift and change before my eyes. The shadows danced, and for a moment, I thought I saw faces staring back at me from the walls. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to continue. As I made my way through the building, the feeling of being followed grew stronger. I could hear faint footsteps behind me, but every time I turned around, there was nothing there. The sense of dread was overwhelming, but I pressed on, driven by a need to understand what was happening. That night, I had a vision, or perhaps it was a dream. I saw the building as it once was, bustling with activity and life. But something terrible had happened here. Something that had left a mark on the very fabric of the place. The vision was fleeting, but it left me with a sense of urgency. I knew I had to find out more, no matter the cost. My investigations led me to the basement, a place I had avoided until now. The air was thick with dust, and the only light came from my flickering flashlight. As I descended the stairs, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. I felt a chill run down my spine as I reached the bottom and saw a series of old, rusted doors lining the walls. One of the doors was slightly ajar, and as I approached it, I felt a wave of cold air wash over me. Pushing the door open, I was hit by the stench of decay and rot. Inside, the room was filled with old furniture, broken and covered in dust. But what caught my attention was a set of old journals stacked neatly on a table. As I opened the first journal, I realized I had found a treasure trove of information about the building's dark past. With the journals in hand, I retreated to a quiet corner of the basement to read. The writings were detailed accounts from previous employees, all sharing similar experiences of fear and unease. Each journal mentioned the strict rule about never leaving after sunset, hinting at something sinister that occurred when darkness fell. As I delved deeper into the journals, the building above seemed to come alive with a malevolent energy. I could hear faint footsteps echoing through the halls and the distant creak of doors opening and closing. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The words on the pages began to blur as my fear grew, but I forced myself to continue reading. The most chilling entry described a night when one of the employees had broken the rule. The writer detailed how they had seen shadowy figures emerging from the walls, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The building had seemed to shift and change, trapping them in a maze of darkness. They had barely escaped with their life, and their account ended abruptly with a final warning: never stay after dark. As the sun set outside, I felt the atmosphere in the building shift. The temperature dropped, and a heavy silence descended. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I could feel the presence closing in around me, suffocating me with its intensity. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, and my flashlight's beam grew weaker. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to stay in the basement past sunset. I wanted to see for myself what horrors awaited in the darkness. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, the building seemed to exhale, releasing a torrent of unseen forces. The shadows deepened, and the air grew thick with the smell of decay. Suddenly, the lights in the basement flickered back on, casting an eerie glow over the room. I could see the shadowy figures from the journals, emerging from the walls and moving towards me. My heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The figures were indistinct, their forms shifting and changing, but their presence was unmistakable. They were the guardians of the building's dark secrets, and they were not pleased with my intrusion. Faced with the shadowy figures, my fear threatened to overwhelm me, but my determination to uncover the truth kept me rooted in place. The figures seemed to hover, observing me with unseen eyes. I clutched the journals tightly, feeling their weight as a connection to the past and a shield against the encroaching darkness. With trembling hands, I opened another journal, hoping to find some clue about the figures now surrounding me. The entries revealed the building's history, detailing its construction over a century ago and the various businesses that had occupied its halls. One entry stood out. It mentioned a secret society that had once used the basement for their rituals. They believed the building was a conduit to another realm, and their practices had left a permanent mark. The more I read, the more I understood the sinister energy that permeated the building. The society had dabbled in dark arts, summoning entities that now haunted the premises. The rule about not leaving after sunset was their way of containing the malevolent forces they had unleashed. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the true extent of what I was up against. As the figures drew closer, I noticed that they seemed to be drawn to the journals. I decided to use this to my advantage, holding the books out in front of me as I moved towards the exit. The figures hesitated, giving me a narrow path to escape. My heart pounded as I made my way up the stairs, the whispers growing louder with each step. Reaching the ground floor, I paused to catch my breath. The building was eerily silent, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to have lifted slightly. I knew I had to find a way to end the haunting, to put the restless spirits to rest. The journals held the key, and I needed to decipher their secrets. That night, I took the journals home, determined to study them further. I spent hours poring over the faded pages, piecing together the society's rituals and their ultimate downfall. The final entries were the most telling, describing a ritual that had gone horribly wrong, trapping the spirits of the participants within the building. Their leader had been particularly powerful, and his spirit was the source of the dark presence. Armed with this knowledge, I knew what I had to do. I needed to perform a counter-ritual to banish the spirits and break the curse. The instructions were complex, and the materials difficult to obtain, but it was my only hope. I had to face the darkness one last time, with the knowledge that failure could mean being trapped in the building's sinister grip forever. Determined to end the haunting, I gathered the necessary materials for the counter-ritual. Returning to the building, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, despite the gnawing fear in my gut. The air was thick with tension as I descended once more into the basement, the journals clutched tightly in my hands. The forbidden door, the one that had sparked my curiosity from the beginning, now seemed even more foreboding. I knew that behind it lay the heart of the building's darkness. With trembling hands, I inserted the old key I had found among the materials in the journal. The lock clicked open, and the door creaked ajar, revealing a room shrouded in shadow. Inside, the room was unlike any other part of the building. The walls were covered in strange symbols and occult diagrams, remnants of the secret society's rituals. In the center of the room stood an altar, upon which lay an old, tattered book bound in leather. The air was colder here, and I could feel the presence of the spirits more strongly than ever. I placed the materials on the altar and began to prepare for the ritual. My hands shook as I drew the necessary symbols on the floor and recited the incantations from the journal. The room seemed to close in around me, the shadows deepening and the whispers growing louder. I could feel the spirits watching, waiting to see if I would succeed or fail. As I lit the candles and arranged the final elements, a sudden gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the flames. The darkness closed in, and I felt a hand brush against my shoulder. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to remain calm. I relit the candles, determined not to be swayed by the spirit's attempts to intimidate me. With the preparations complete, I began the counter-ritual. The air crackled with energy as I chanted the ancient words, my voice growing stronger with each verse. The shadows writhed and twisted, the spirits reacting to the power of the ritual. I felt a surge of hope. Perhaps I could finally end this nightmare. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was the leader of the secret society, his form more solid and imposing than the other spirits. His eyes burned with a malevolent light as he advanced toward me. Fear threatened to overwhelm me, but I stood my ground, continuing the chant. The room shook, and the symbols on the walls glowed with an eerie light. With a final, desperate effort, I completed the ritual. A blinding light filled the room, and the spirits let out a collective wail. The leader's form began to dissolve, his power broken. The darkness receded, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but triumphant. The building was finally free from its sinister past. Exhausted but relieved, I slowly rose to my feet, taking in the now quiet and still room. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and the shadowy figures had vanished. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of victory, but I knew my work wasn't finished yet. There were still questions unanswered, and the true extent of the building's dark past remained a mystery. As I made my way back to the main floor, the building seemed almost normal. The air was no longer thick with dread, and the lights remained steady. I returned to the office where I had found the old book, feeling a strange connection to it. Opening the pages again, I realized there was one final ritual described, one that could permanently seal the connection between our world and the dark realm the society had tapped into. Determined to ensure the safety of anyone who might come after me, I decided to perform this last ritual. It required returning to the basement, to the heart of the darkness. Gathering the materials once more, I steeled myself for the final confrontation. This time, the building seemed to recognize my intent. The shadows no longer menacing, but watchful, as if waiting to see if I would succeed. Back in the basement, I set up for the ritual with a sense of urgency. The room felt different now, less hostile, but still charged with an eerie energy. As I began the incantations, the walls seemed to hum with power, the symbols glowing faintly in response to my words. The air grew colder, and I felt the presence of the spirits once more. But this time, they seemed less malevolent, as if they were being drawn to the light of the ritual. Halfway through, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The building seemed to groan, as if reacting to the power being unleashed. The shadows coalesced into a single dark figure, the leader of the secret society. His presence was overwhelming, his form solidifying more than before. His eyes, burning with the same malevolent light, locked onto mine. I continued the ritual, my voice unwavering, though fear gnawed at the edges of my resolve. The leader moved towards me, his figure flickering between shadow and substance. His voice, when he spoke, was a whisper, filled with centuries of anger and regret. He pleaded for release, for an end to his torment. His words shook me, but I knew I had to complete the ritual. With a final forceful chant, I summoned all my strength and commanded him to return to the darkness. The room exploded with light, blinding and pure. The leader's form disintegrated, his cries echoing through the space. The light spread, filling every corner of the basement, and I felt a profound sense of peace. The connection was severed, and the building's dark past was finally laid to rest. The blinding light slowly faded, leaving the basement bathed in an eerie calm. I stood there, breathing heavily, my heart racing. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted completely, replaced by a sense of profound peace. The shadows no longer seemed menacing, and the whispers had ceased. The building felt normal. I made my way back to the main floor, each step feeling lighter than the last. The once sinister corridors now seemed like just another part of an old building. As I walked through the lobby, I noticed a change in the air. It was fresher, lighter, as if the building itself had sighed in relief. My fear and anxiety had been replaced by a sense of accomplishment. Returning home, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The past few nights had taken a toll on me, both physically and mentally. I collapsed into bed, hoping for a dreamless sleep. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly, free from nightmares and dark visions. The next day, I woke up to a bright morning, the sun streaming through my window. The events of the past week felt almost surreal, like a distant memory. I spent the day reflecting on everything that had happened. The journals, the shadowy figures, the rituals. It all seemed like something out of a dark fantasy, but the lingering sense of peace reminded me that it was all real. I decided to return to the building one last time. As I walked through the now familiar doors, I was greeted by Tom, the security guard. He looked at me with a mixture of relief and curiosity. "You did it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. I nodded, unable to find the right words. The building felt different now, and Tom could sense it too. In the days that followed, I handed over the journals to a local historian, ensuring that the story of the building and the secret society would not be forgotten. I hoped that their dark practices would serve as a warning to others about the dangers of meddling with forces beyond our understanding. Despite the peace that now filled the building, I couldn't shake a lingering sense of sadness. The spirits I had encountered were once people, driven by curiosity and ambition, who had paid a terrible price. Their leader, in his final moments, had shown a glimpse of regret and sorrow. I wondered if, in some way, I had helped them find a measure of peace. As I closed the chapter on this dark adventure, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, accomplishment, but also a deep sadness for the lives lost and the horrors endured. The building was free, and I had played a part in its liberation. But the experience had changed me, leaving a mark on my soul that would never fade. Leaving the building for the last time, I took one final look back. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. But this time, the shadows held no fear. They were just shadows, nothing more. I walked away, feeling the weight of the past lift from my shoulders, ready to embrace whatever the future held.